Move on to our last presentation, yet another subject. I don't need to introduce Daniel because you now know him already, but this time he is going to be talking about mobility scooters, and I think that again is a hugely growing market with the rise in older people and in some countries obesity along the way, so it's again a very important topic. Daniel.
Thanks. Hi everyone again. Okay, so I presented on a previous project which is sort of in progress. I'm going to be presenting right now on a couple of initiatives that are completed, but I think there's probably still a lot of work left to do in this area overall. So this is defining the scooter, establishing an acceptable definition for motorized mobility devices. Just a little outline of what I'll talk about. I'll give some introduction and background to the importance of this research, talk about recent R&D conducted by Transportation on motorized mobility devices, research results, and some next steps. So just so that everybody knows that what we're talking about, this is an image of a motorized mobility device, and what I'll be referring to in this presentation, some people refer to them as scooters. I think I've heard other words used for these as well in different countries. But I like to use the term motorized mobility device, and it's comes in 3 or 4 wheel configurations, usually has a tiller and a seat with some armrests, and comes in a variety of sizes. So introduction and background, why there's a need to do research on the use of motorized mobility devices. As everybody knows, we have a situation with an aging population demographically. There's a potential increased use for these motorized mobility devices due to the changing demographics. There's currently quite a lack of regulations and standards, I think at all levels of government, municipal to national, in Canada anyways, with regards to the use of these types of devices. And again, well-being and human rights implications. These devices do allow people to have mobility options and increased mobility if people have trouble walking, and increased accessibility is very much related to a higher sense of satisfaction in life. So some recent Transport Canada related projects to motorized mobility devices. Back in November of 2011, we completed what was called analysis and assessment of the environment for 3- and 4-wheel mobility scooters, and I'll talk briefly about that. And then following that, last November, we had a workshop with the Canadian Urban Transit Association, which is a national organization that brings together transit operators in Canada. We had a workshop with them to look at a definition for motorized mobility devices. Going back to the study that was completed in November of 2011, the scope was to analyze and assess the environment for 3- and 4-wheel mobility scooters, and to identify future needs for safe operation. The environment included the physical environment as well as the regulatory environment in which these devices operate. And we looked at 4 parameters, including the scooter or the mobility device, the user, so who is using the devices, the environment in which they operate, like I mentioned, physical and regulatory, and the key stakeholders who are involved in the operation of these devices. That includes transportation service providers and regulators. The methodology included, so this was a review of national and international literature available on motorized mobility devices, consultations with public and private stakeholders, which included provincial governments, some local governments, some federal government departments. We held a stakeholder forum in Qualicum Beach, British Columbia, which is the I guess it would be the oldest population in Canada. This is somewhat of a retirement community on the east coast of Vancouver Island, and they have actually quite a bit of users of motorized mobility devices there. And we analyzed the results of all the information that we had gathered and came up with some recommendations and conclusions. Just some of the results of that study. So some of the issues that were identified, safety concerns of motorized mobility device users vis-a-vis other road users such as cyclists, pedestrians, and drivers. The transportability and securement of these devices in public transit and intercity transportation was something that was highlighted as an issue. Who is responsible for implementing regulations or ensuring safe operation? And there was a lack of data out there. So a lot of the information that we gathered in this study was mainly qualitative and from talking to small numbers of people and administering small amounts of survey. There's a lack of really national data. I think actually provinces in Canada collect a lot of data on who uses motorized mobility aids because a lot of provinces have different funding schemes, but there's no sort of national picture out there. So the study, I think one of the important points of this study was that it proposed a definition of what a motorized mobility device is, and it was felt that this definition required further validation by stakeholders. So this is the definition, and for the sake of time, I'm not going to read it, but it basically outlines who uses a mobility device, motorized mobility device, some of its features, maximum speed, and the configuration of 3 or 4 wheels. So this was a proposed definition, and in November of 2013, we held a workshop, we being Transport Canada, held a workshop, as I mentioned, with the Canadian Urban Transit Association. And the objective of that workshop was to validate the proposed definition, look at how we can move forward once we have this definition, and agree on a way forward for future research activities. So the workshop included a presentation from speakers to sort of stimulate discussions. We had some roundtable discussions. We had a role play session that was very effective, and we also collected surveys from the participants. So the results, essentially we had a day-long workshop that was held on November 27th. We had 48 participants, and the participants, actually this slide here gives a breakdown of the participants. Since this was a transit conference, we mainly had people from the transit industry there, transit operators and transit users, made up over half of the participants in blue and red there, as well as a number of people from municipalities highlighted in green. What was really important and interesting, and I think a success of this activity, was that we actively sought participation for this workshop from occupational therapists who are often involved in people obtaining these types of motorized mobility devices, and they really didn't have a dialogue with the transit community, so I think that was a good thing to get those groups of people together. Because occupational therapists are very much involved in providing mobility options for people. So we collected a lot of information at this workshop, and in a lot of transportation safety research, we talk about the 3 E's, so engineering, education, and enforcement, and we tried to look at the results through this lens to sort of help us in distilling the information that we gathered. So engineering includes the physical characteristics of the devices and the environment in which they operate. Education includes raising awareness about issues related to motorized mobility devices for users, for transportation operators, and for decision makers. So a lot of times users of motorized mobility devices will encounter a situation where they come to a public transit operator, an intercity operator, and they're not sure of the policies for transporting the device, and then the transportation operator might not be aware of what their responsibilities are as well. So this was, providing people with information is one of the important things. And then enforcement had to do with any kind of standards, guidelines, or regulations. So what we really wanted to do at this workshop was look at the definition and validate it to see if this is an effective definition for motorized mobility devices. And what the participants told us, not surprisingly, is that it might not be the best definition. We might be looking at a situation where we need two different types of definitions for motorized mobility devices that are transportable and for motorized mobility devices that are not transportable. So one of the issues with these types of scooters is increasing size. Something that we encountered in Qualicum because of the weather, there's a lot of rain there. Some of the motorized mobility devices have these kind of canopies and roofs, so they can get quite large. I think that the key here is that if people using a motorized mobility device is aware that it's transportable, then it helps to manage their expectations when they want to use another mode of transportation. Whereas if a person knows that, okay, I'm in a motorized mobility device that might be a bit faster, a bit larger, and able to negotiate different terrain, however, it's not transportable. So that was kind of the perspective on the definition. Just some photos here to show what might be a transportable motorized mobility device at the top, which is conventionally what you would see. And then at the bottom are examples of non-transportable motorized mobility devices. So we have a sort of tandem car here that would be quite wide and may not fit in all transit or intercity transportation situations. And the other photo is just quite a large motorized mobility device that might not be able to enter or be secured in a public transportation vehicle. So how do we move forward with this definition? I think we looked at some of the roles at the workshop and came to a conclusion that the federal jurisdiction would really be looking at regulating vehicles and devices. So in Canada, if a vehicle is manufactured or comes into the country, it has to meet certain safety standards. I'm thinking from a device point of view, it would probably be similar in terms of minimum standards. The provincial jurisdiction, provinces are usually responsible for licensing, insurance, funding to obtain devices, and the safety code. So one of the things that we looked at was if it is considered a non-transportable device and it's a vehicle, then does it require a license, and does somebody have to register the device? These kinds of questions came up. Municipal jurisdictions really look at access to rights of way and developing bylaws, whether or not this type of device could operate on a sidewalk or in a bike path. But by providing an overarching definition, I think it helps for other levels of government to have a better idea of how to make a decision on how to make regulations for motorized mobility devices. Just really quickly, some of the research needs that we found for engineering research, having effective safety features, enabling the transportability and securement onboard vehicles, and helping an accessible design of buildings to accommodate motorized mobility devices. Enforcement research, creation of effective guidelines and standards and regulations for transportable and non-transportable motorized mobility devices. And for education research, I think training and education for users, transportation providers, and people who sell these devices is important. And again, having data on motorized mobility device users, how much are sold, are also areas where we could benefit from some more research. And this just quickly is sort of an org chart that summarizes the results of the workshop, indicating kind of who's responsible for what, as I had mentioned before, in terms of the different levels of government, research needs, and who could be looked at for carrying out that research. And we do have a draft report on the workshop that's probably the next best thing to actually having been there, and I'd be happy to share that with people. And there's also a final report available on the first study that I mentioned that I would also be happy to share with anyone who asks. Thanks.
I think we've got, let's start with any questions for Daniel, and then if we've got time, we can open it up again. There we go.
Hello. Yeah. My name is Robert de Kloef from the Netherlands, and I would like to know where, and if so, why do you make the cut between power wheelchairs and scooters?
Well, the difference between the two is people using motorized mobility devices that are not motorized wheelchairs often have the option to walk short distances, so they may be ambulatory or semi-ambulatory. So that's an important distinction. And then I think another important distinction has to do with the standards that exist for wheelchair and motorized wheelchair dimensions, and then the motorized mobility devices. There aren't a lot of standards out there, and they tend to be designed based on how people are buying them, I guess. And so they are oftentimes larger and heavier than motorized wheelchairs.
Could you use the microphone, please?
Over here, are they power wheelchairs or are they scooters? They're more heavy than the scooter over here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a valid point, and I think it lends to the idea of having separate definitions for something that's transportable and something that isn't transportable.
Portable.
Well, I think in designing transit vehicles or vehicles, there are certain guidelines that manufacturers have to adhere to if it's going to be an accessible vehicle or not. So
I'm asking these questions, of course, because in Europe we have many different types of wheelchairs, power wheelchairs and scooters, and the definition between those, where one stops and the other starts, is very difficult,
Yeah.
almost impossible.
Mhm.
So if you all of a sudden can give a definition, we'll be very happy, of course.
yeah.
Do you mind if I do? There's quite a lot of ISO definitions under ISO 7176, and including Part 19, which covers transportable wheelchairs intended for use within transport, if I can remember the definition. And that includes quite a number of things, both about dimensions and also security, securing systems, and various other characteristics. We can discuss quite a bit later.
See that question outside.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. However, I don't want to sound presumptuous, but we are talking about people using motorized vehicles, yes?
Yes.
Because the way you were talking is that wheelchairs, transporting devices, all these things are machines, and you can just stuff them in a suitcase, and it really doesn't matter. And it's dangerous when you start using terminology like that. People get confused and forget the person using the device. Now, in your presentation, you said you had difficulty finding data on how many users have motorized, and it might be to the fact that in Quebec it's under the l'assurance maladie du Québec, and it's confidential information, so you'll never get that data.
Yeah.
And well, the rest of the country is private insurance, and it's very difficult data. I volunteer in a committee with COFAN, which is the Confédération des personnes handicapées du Québec, and we actually work on the transport committee, and we try to get data on that, and it's very, very difficult. And to limit people actually on the size of the scooters is also very dangerous, because it's just like trying to tell people what kind of cars they can buy and what kind of cars they cannot buy just because it's too big or too small. I was wondering, in your project, did you have any, in your definition, why were you trying to do a definition nationally when most of these devices and transportation of the people using these devices is of provincial jurisdiction, aside from airplanes, trains, and boats?
Yeah, well, for us being, and I appreciate your comments, your first comments, very, thank you for those. From our perspective as a transportation department, our preoccupation with the use of motorized mobility devices has to do with how they interface with the wider transportation system. Because if somebody is using a mobility device, it's a device that they need to use, and there are human rights reasons for the transportation of them and their device. But then, you know, we hear a lot of information about how these particular scooters are becoming larger and heavier, and there's a demand for larger and heavier devices. So how does that line up with what transportation providers can offer in terms of service? And I think for us, providing a definition from a national point of view sort of gives guidance to other levels of government in how to address the situation.
Okay, I think we're really out of time. I'm sorry, but can I suggest that you grab any of the three speakers you want to ask follow-up questions to as they come out of the room. I don't think we dare overrun because we're all keeping to the same schedule. So thank you very much indeed. I think it's been an enormously interesting afternoon on four very different topics. So please join me in thanking our speakers.